I didn't think much of it when I said yes. That's the part that still messes with me. It felt like such a harmless decision at the time, the kind you don't replay in your head until later, when you realize it quietly split your life into before and after. I'd had a brutal week. Long hours, tight deadlines, the kind of stress that settles into your shoulders and refuses to leave. My neck felt locked, my lower back constantly sore, and sleep wasn't really helping anymore. So when my coworker casually mentioned a massage therapist he'd been seeing, super professional, super chill, really knows his stuff, I figured, why not? I booked the appointment without overthinking it. The place itself didn't scream anything unusual. Small studio, clean, modern, low music humming in the background. The kind of calm that immediately makes you breathe slower. He greeted me at the door with an easy smile, introduced himself, shook my hand. Confident, but not cocky. Friendly, but not overly familiar. At least, not yet. He asked the standard questions: where I felt tension, how deep I wanted the pressure, any injuries. I told him shoulders, lower back, maybe hips. I remember joking that I felt about 80 years old. He laughed, warm and relaxed, and said, "We'll take good care of you." That should have been the end of it. Just a massage. An hour. In and out. I changed, laid face down on the table, towel placed carefully over me. The room dimmed a bit. The music turned softer. When his hands first touched my shoulders, I actually sighed out loud. The pressure was perfect, firm, slow, intentional. He knew exactly where to press, where to linger, where to ease off. For the first 15 minutes, it was everything I'd hoped for. Then little things started to feel different. Not wrong, just different. His hands didn't rush. They stayed longer than I expected, especially around my lower back. His thumbs traced slow paths along muscles that felt way too sensitive. When he leaned in, I became aware of how close he actually was. Not in an intrusive way, just close enough that I noticed his breathing, steady and calm, right above me. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just relaxed, hyper-aware, reading into nothing. But when he adjusted the towel carefully, deliberately, and his fingers brushed my skin in a way that felt a little too intentional, my body reacted before my brain could catch up. I stiffened for half a second. He noticed. "You good?" he asked, voice low, almost casual. "Yeah," I said quickly. Too quickly. "Yeah, I'm fine." He paused, just long enough for the silence to stretch, then continued. Same pressure, same pace, but the atmosphere in the room had shifted. Subtly, like a line had been approached, not crossed, yet. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a massage anymore. And the part that scared me the most wasn't what he might do next. It was how badly a part of me didn't want him to stop. I lay there staring at the little dip in the headrest, trying to steady my breathing. Nothing had happened. Not really. That was the rational thought I kept clinging to. A brush of fingers. A pause. A vibe. All things that could still live safely under the umbrella of coincidence if I wanted them to. But my body wasn't buying it. Every time his hands moved back to my lower back, my muscles reacted before I could stop them, loosening in a way that felt less like relaxation and more like anticipation. I hated how aware I suddenly was of myself, of my skin, my breathing, the way my pulse sped up whenever his touch slowed. He worked quietly for a while, moving upward again, as if giving me space. Shoulders, neck, long, controlled strokes that grounded me just enough to stop my thoughts from spiraling. I started to relax again. That's when he spoke. "You hold a lot of tension down here," he said, almost conversational, one hand resting at the base of my spine. "It's pretty common." "Yeah." My voice sounded rougher than I expected. "Yeah. Stress, posture, sitting too much." A small pause. "Sometimes people don't even realize how tight they are." His thumb pressed in, slow and deliberate, and I took a steady breath before I could react. He didn't apologize this time. Instead, he adjusted his stance, closer now, and continued working the same spot, like he was testing something. Or maybe testing me. I couldn't tell where professionalism ended and something else began anymore, and that uncertainty made my stomach twist. In a way that wasn't entirely unpleasant. "You okay if I work a little lower?" he asked. There it was. The question that mattered. I should have said no. Or at least hesitated. Asked for clarification. Something responsible. Instead, I nodded into the headrest before realizing he couldn't see me. "Yeah," I said. "That's fine." His hand shifted under the towel, still careful, Still technically appropriate, but barely. The contact felt warmer now, more intentional. My thoughts scattered, replaced by sensation. The room felt smaller, quieter, like the rest of the world had politely stepped outside and shut the door. I was hyper-aware of everything. The sound of his breathing, the faint scent of clean soap on his hands, the way his fingers paused just long enough between movements to make my chest tighten. At one point, he leaned in to adjust the towel again, and this time I didn't flinch. I didn't move at all. Neither did he. For a second, just when I thought he might say something, or that I might. Instead, he straightened slowly and continued the massage like nothing had happened, like we hadn't just shared a moment charged enough to make my skin buzz. That somehow made it worse. The rest of the session passed in a blur. My body was relaxed, sure, but my mind was wide awake, racing, replaying every second. When he finally stepped back and told me he'd give me a moment to get dressed, I felt a weird mix of relief and disappointment. As I sat up, heart still pounding, one thought kept looping in my head. I had agreed to a massage, but something told me I'd just agreed to more than that. And the scariest part? If he'd asked me outright, I wasn't sure I would have said no. I left the studio feeling off. Physically, I felt great. Loose. Light. Like someone had unplugged the constant ache I'd been carrying around for months. But mentally, I was a mess. My thoughts wouldn't settle, bouncing back to every pause, every question, every moment where something almost happened. The air outside felt too cold after the warmth of the room. I stood there for a second before heading to my car, hands shoved into my pockets, replaying the way he'd asked, "You okay if I work a little lower?" Not the words themselves, but how he'd said them. Calm. Neutral. Like he already knew my answer. I told myself to drop it. It was a massage. Therapists work close to your body. Touch is literally the job. I was projecting. End of story. Except, I booked another appointment that same night. I didn't even hesitate. I told myself it was because he was good at what he did, which was true. Probably the best massage I'd ever had. But if I'm being honest, that wasn't the real reason. The real reason sat heavier in my chest, unspoken but loud. I wanted to know if that tension was real. The second appointment was a week later. I spent the whole day distracted, checking the time more than I'd like to admit. By the time I walked back into the studio, my nerves were buzzing. He greeted me the same way, easy smile, relaxed posture, like nothing unusual had ever happened between us, which somehow made it worse. "Same areas as last time?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. Then, after a beat, "If that's okay." His eyes flicked up to mine for just a second longer than necessary. Of course. That look, that tiny pause confirmed it. I wasn't crazy. He remembered too. The routine started the same. Music low, lights dimmed, me face down on the table, towel in place. When his hands touched my shoulders again, my body reacted instantly, like it had been waiting all week for this exact moment. This time, he didn't ask if I was okay when I tensed. He adjusted his pressure instead, slower, firmer, grounding me, like he was guiding me through it, silently telling me to breathe, to let go. And I did, way too easily. When his hands moved lower again, there was no question this time. No verbal one, at least. He paused just enough for me to speak up if I wanted to. I didn't. That felt like an answer in itself. The room felt charged now, thick with awareness. Every touch carried weight. Every shift of his hands felt deliberate, measured, controlled. Not rushed, not sloppy, just intentional. At one point, he leaned closer again, and this time I didn't pretend not to notice. My breath caught, shallow and quiet. I could feel how near he was without seeing him, like my body had developed some extra sense. "You're doing fine," he said softly. "Not are you okay? You're doing fine." That sentence did something to me. It settled something deep in my chest, like permission I hadn't known I was waiting for. When the session ended, neither of us moved right away. I sat up slowly, the towel still around me, my pulse loud in my ears. He stood a few feet away, hands relaxed at his sides, watching me but not in a way that felt invasive. More like he was waiting. For me. "If you ever want to talk before we start," he said carefully. "About pressure, boundaries, anything, just let me know." Our eyes met. The word boundaries hung between us, heavy and loaded. "Okay," I said. It was all I could manage. As I left that second time, one thing was painfully clear. This wasn't accidental anymore. And whatever line we were circling, we were both very aware of exactly where it was. After that second appointment, Things changed quietly, but unmistakably. I didn't rush to book another session right away. Not because I didn't want to, but because I needed to understand what was happening inside my own head first. The tension wasn't just physical anymore. It followed me home, sat with me at work, crept in when I was alone at night. I kept thinking about the way he'd said boundaries. Not as a warning, as an invitation to define them. A few days later, I finally booked again. This time, when I walked into the studio, there was a different energy between us. Still professional, still calm, but stripped of pretense. We both knew we were no longer pretending this was just another routine appointment. Before I could even change, he gestured toward the small seating area. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. My stomach flipped. "Yeah." We sat across from each other, knees angled slightly inward, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off him. He didn't rush. That seemed to be his thing, letting silence do some of the work. "I want to make sure we're on the same page," he said finally. "Last time felt different." I swallowed. "Yeah, it did." He nodded, eyes steady on mine. "I don't cross lines without consent. Ever. But I also don't want you feeling confused or uncomfortable." "I'm not uncomfortable," I said quickly, then softened it. "Just aware." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. That's a good word for it. The air between us felt tight, like we were both holding something fragile. "If we continue," he said carefully, "it needs to be intentional. Clear. You can stop anything at any point." I noticed how he said "if we continue," not "if I continue." "What does continue mean?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he held my gaze, giving me time to pull back if I wanted to. "It means the massage stays a massage," he said slowly, but with the understanding that touch can feel layered. "If that's not something you want, we keep things strictly clinical." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "And if it is something I want?" I asked. His breath shifted, subtle but noticeable. Then we moved slowly, with awareness, and with trust. There it was again, that word. Trust. I nodded once. "I trust you." That was the moment everything settled into place. The session that followed felt different from anything before it. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because everything was deliberate. He checked in with me using looks instead of words, pauses instead of pressure. Every movement felt grounded in mutual understanding rather than ambiguity. I wasn't lost in my head anymore. I was present. When it ended, we didn't rush. I sat up, met his eyes, and for the first time, neither of us looked away. "This works for you?" he asked quietly. "Yeah," I said. "It really does." As I left, I realized something that made my chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with nerves. I wasn't just going back for the massage anymore. I was going back for him. By the fourth appointment, the routine itself had become almost ceremonial. Same time, same room, same low music humming beneath everything else. But the way we moved around each other now before I even got on the table was different. Familiar. Charged. Like two people who had learned the weight of silence together. I didn't need to explain where the tension was anymore. He already knew. "You've been holding more in your hips this week," he said casually as I settled face down. I laughed softly into the headrest. "I didn't say that." "You don't have to." That still got to me how observant he was. Not just of my body, but of my reactions. My breathing. The way I responded before I even realized I was responding. The massage started slow. Slower than usual. His hands felt heavier somehow. More grounding. Like he was anchoring me to the table. I focused on breathing, on letting myself be present instead of spiraling ahead to what might happen. At some point, he placed a hand at my lower back and didn't move it right away. Not in a teasing way. Just steady. "You're tense today," he said quietly. "Yeah," I admitted. "It's been a week." His thumb pressed in gently, then eased off. "You want to talk? Or do you want to let your body do it?" That question hit deeper than I expected. "Let my body do it," I said. He nodded, even though I couldn't see it. From there, everything felt slower. More intentional. His touch followed patterns I'd started to recognize, ones that helped me let go instead of bracing. When my breath hitched, he adjusted. When I relaxed, he stayed right there, letting the moment stretch instead of rushing past it. At one point, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't nervous anymore. The tension I'd been carrying since the first appointment, the uncertainty, the constant what if, had dissolved into something quieter. Trust. Not blind trust, not reckless trust. The kind built moment by moment, check-in by check-in. When the session ended, I didn't jump up right away like before. I sat there, Towel around my waist, shoulders loose, head clear. That helped, I said. He smiled, softer than usual. I'm glad. There was a pause. A familiar one now. You okay? He asked, not as a formality, but genuinely. Yeah, I said. Then, after a second, more than okay. Our eyes met, and something unspoken passed between us. Not urgency, not pressure, just awareness again, but this time, it felt calm. Grounded. As I stood to leave, he added, if you ever want this to stay exactly where it is, it can. I nodded. And if I don't, then we talk, he said simply. Walking out that day, I realized something important. Whatever this was, it wasn't about crossing a line. It was about standing right at the edge of one, together, and choosing how to be there. The next time I came in, I noticed it immediately. Not the room, not the music, but him. Something about his posture was different. More relaxed. Less guarded. Like the unspoken agreement between us had taken weight off his shoulders too. You look better today, he said as I set my bag down. I feel better, I replied. I think this is officially my stress outlet now. He smiled at that, real and easy. Good. That's what it's supposed to be. This time, before I even got on the table, he asked, anything you want to change today? I thought about it. Not just the massage, the whole dynamic. No, I said, then added, honest and calm, I like where this is. His eyes held mine for a beat longer than usual. Me too. The massage unfolded with a quiet confidence that surprised me. There was no testing anymore. No hesitation. Just presence. His hands moved with certainty, not because he was pushing forward, but because we'd already agreed on the pace. At one point, I realized I wasn't thinking at all. No analyzing. No second-guessing. Just sensation and breath and the steady awareness of another person paying attention to me in a way that felt rare. When he paused near the end, hands resting lightly, he didn't rush to step away. You've gotten good at letting go, he said softly. I smiled into the headrest. Guess I had the right help. He let out a quiet laugh. Maybe. Or maybe you were ready. Afterward, instead of standing across the room like before, he handed me a glass of water and leaned against the counter nearby. Close, but not crossing anything. The space between us felt intentional. Can I ask you something? I said. Of course. Does this ever get complicated for you? He considered that, not dodging it. It can. If people don't know what they want, or if they're afraid to say it. And with me? He met my eyes. With you, it feels clear. That landed harder than I expected. I nodded slowly. It does. Yeah. We stood there for a moment, neither of us in a hurry to move. Not charged like before. Just comfortable. Familiar. Like the tension had transformed into something steadier. When I finally headed for the door, he said, same time next week? I smiled. Wouldn't miss it. Walking out, I realized something had shifted again, but this time, it didn't feel like edging toward a line. It felt like we'd found a place to stand that belonged to both of us. I didn't expect the shift to happen outside the studio. That was the one place everything felt contained, intentional, safe. For walls, low music, clear boundaries we'd built carefully over time. What I hadn't prepared for was how that connection followed me once I stepped back into real life. It started small. A comment I caught myself wanting to tell him during the week. A moment of tension where my first thought was, I'll feel better after Thursday. Not just physically, mentally. Emotionally. That realization hit harder than I liked. When I came in the next time, he noticed it before I said anything. You're quieter today, he said gently. Yeah, I admitted. Just thinking. He nodded, like he understood more than I'd explained. We can take it easy. The massage that day was slower, softer. Less about releasing tension and more about grounding. His hands felt familiar now, not charged, not testing. Steady. Reassuring. Halfway through, I found myself speaking without planning to. Do you ever worry this is more than it should be? I asked quietly. His hands didn't stop, but the pressure shifted, gentler now. I think about it, he said. But I also think avoiding connection just because it's meaningful can be its own kind of mistake. That stayed with me. When the session ended, I didn't rush to leave. Instead, we stood by the doorway, closer than usual. Not touching, just existing in the same space. I want to be clear, I said. I don't want to blur things in a way that messes this up. He smiled, soft and sincere. Neither do I. There was a pause. A deep one. Maybe, he added, carefully. That just means being honest when things change. I nodded. Yeah, I can do that. That was the moment I understood what this really was. Not temptation, not crossing lines, not something secret or reckless. It was two people choosing presence over avoidance, awareness over denial. And as I walked out that evening, I felt something I hadn't expected at all. Not tension, peace. The last session didn't feel like a turning point. That's what surprised me most. There was no dramatic moment, no sudden confession, no line finally crossed. It felt natural, like something that had been quietly moving toward clarity all along. I came in that day without the usual buzz of anticipation or nerves, just calm. When he greeted me, it felt the same way, warm, familiar, grounded. "How are you today?" he asked. I thought about it honestly. "Good. Really good." He smiled, like that answer mattered. The massage itself was simple. No testing, no lingering pauses that asked questions without words. Just presence, care, attention. It felt like the purest version of what we'd built together, touch without tension, closeness without uncertainty. Near the end, as he stepped back and gave me space to sit up, I realized something had shifted inside me. I wasn't wondering what this was anymore. I knew. "I think," I said slowly, meeting his eyes. "This has helped me understand something about myself." He tilted his head slightly. "Yeah, I don't confuse intensity with connection anymore," I said. "And I don't run from connection just because it's real." His expression softened. "That's a good place to land." We stood there for a moment, quiet and unhurried. "You know," he said, "this doesn't have to end just because it's settled." I nodded. "I know. And it doesn't have to become something else either." He smiled, genuine, calm. "Exactly. When I left that day, it didn't feel like walking away from something unresolved. It felt like carrying something with me, something steady, something earned." I'd agreed to a massage. What I walked away with was trust, awareness, a reminder that intimacy doesn't have to be rushed or reckless to be real. That sometimes, the most powerful connections live exactly where you choose to place them. And honestly, that was more than enough.